Hello, AP World. Welcome to part 2 of chapter 7, which is about Europe and the wider world. I just finished part 1 by talking about the new business type of arrangements that were occurring. I'd like to point out on this map here a couple of things. The red dots here represent the Hanseatic cities. And you can see that the Hanseatic cities, those that are part of the Hanseatic League, are in Russia, Scandinavia, Great Britain, and through these routes of the Hanseatic League and then going through the Strait of Gibraltar here, all of Europe is able to connect to the larger trade networks of the Silk Road and eventually Indian Ocean and Atlantic Ocean trading as well. Okay, so moving on. We have the establishment of more and more cities as power centralizes around certain powerful lords who take land of nobles and retainers that have perhaps passed away, and then they absorb their land into their own kingdom. And in these cities, we have the development of guilds. Guilds are really important. They're sort of like the modern day unions. I'm in a union for teachers right now, and the unions protect my wages, but they also make sure that I am providing good quality work. And this is what the guilds did in Europe at this time. So merchants, workers, artisans would come together in these guilds. They would talk about what is a fair price for the work that they're doing, what is the correct standard that we should follow to include someone in the guild. And these were also great opportunities for women who were admitted to most guilds. As long as you had the skill to be a weaver or to be a blacksmith or whatever the case may be, you could be part of the guild. The guilds served as really important economic and social support networks then as they do now. We have something that a social change that occurs where people are divided into what are called the three estates. And this picture is meant to represent that. So we have over here, we have a priest of some kind or a clergy. They have, this particular one has the tonsure, where the top of their head is shaved, and this represents the crown of thorns. So those who pray are the clergy, and the clergy have their own courts, and they have a lot of power. We have those who fight, that would include the knights and the nobles, and we have those who work, which is basically everyone else. The three estates will become more important as we talk, at least the functions of the three estates will become more important as we move through the history of Europe, especially getting to the time of the French Revolution. But just keep in mind, those who pray, those who fight, those who work, these were the primary categories of social status at that time. Now, chivalry became an important church-sponsored code of conduct for the knights. So you have all these knights, right, during the time of protecting villages from raiding Vikings or other barbarians. And they have all this fighting energy. I've done a ton of reading of books from this period of time. And these knights, they get a little gnarly. Let's just be honest. They have all this energy and they like fighting with their swords and they're kind of dirty and they don't treat women very well. And the church just says, hey, you know what? This is enough. We need to get these knights and these nobles under control. So they promote this code of chivalry, which is going to dictate that your behavior should be one of honor, should be orderly, should be pious, should protect Christian values and protect women. And then we even introduce the concept of love. Let's have love in a relationship, in a marriage. The nobles support this because the nobles, they're in control of all of these knights. And so the nobles support this idea of a more orderly group of knights. The concept of courtly love, you court the person that you love, you date them, you show them that you care about them. And then we have the troubadours. The troubadours are actually almost a whole subset of people. They maybe even had their own guild, for all I know, where they would play instruments and they would sing songs. They would sing love songs. So if you've ever been to like the Renaissance Festival, you'll see troubadours walking around with like a little mandolin and singing songs about love. Eleanor of Aquitaine was notable for her support of the troubadours and of this concept of courtly love. Schools and universities become very important during this time, and this is really an exciting time in the world of education. Cathedral-based schools open up. These were previously monasteries, and now these monasteries are beginning to have the first Western or European universities. They have a standard education that includes literature, including Greek classics, philosophy, including the Greek philosophers Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. They have law, and they even have fairly advanced medicine, including physiology and the study of herbs and surgery. Academic guilds form in the 12th century. And you know those robes that you see in Harry Potter and the hoods? Like for my master's ceremony, I got a light blue hood. That hood relates directly back to this time period where the color of the hood actually indicates the area of study that you have specialized in. The standards of education are very high, and they're based on what we call a classical education. So this was a really, really exciting time in the growth of academics and intellectual thought. Important in this time period was religious philosophy, especially something called scholasticism. St. Thomas Aquinas was a proponent of scholasticism, and he actually went back to the ancient Greeks, especially Aristotle. Aristotle believed in the scientific method. He believed very much in the process of reasoning. And so when we look at Aristotelian philosophy, we're going to see proofs. How do we prove something? And so what St. Thomas Aquinas did was he came up with 5 proofs on the existence of God. And so the basic premise is, if the earth is in motion, which it is, then there must have been something that put it in motion. And so I used to actually have my students study the 5 proofs on the existence of God, but honestly, they were over the head of most people at that time. However, people still do study the works of St. Thomas Aquinas, and you might have noticed that there are some schools named St. Thomas, and where I got my master's degree was actually from the University of St. Thomas. So St. Thomas Aquinas was very important in promoting scholasticism and reasoning in the Christian faith. And they did translate texts from several languages into Latin for the ability to more widely read these texts. We see people spend their whole life as monks in monasteries translating texts. Now, what's really important, though, for the average person is personal devotion. The Catholic Church develops a whole panoply of saints that have a variety of functions. And I talked to some of my Catholic friends, and I said, do you pray to your saint? And they said that they do. I personally wasn't raised Catholic, but I have been to Rome, and I have been to Italy, and I've known many Catholic people, and I know that the saints are an important part of their religious personal devotion. Many people went on pilgrimages. Let's say there was a temple that claimed to have a piece of the robe of Christ, a fragment of the wood of the cross of Jesus. These are called relics. And people, the whole economy of a town might revolve around people going to worship at the site of these relics. I saw some relics when I was in Croatia, and they were interesting. One of them was a head of a saint, and then there was like a little open panel, and supposedly the skull of that saint was inside of this silver mold of his head, and people could go there, they could kiss it, they could touch it, and of course this would also improve the economy of the town that had that particular relic. The monasteries, though, begin to reject the materialism of the church, especially St. Dominic and St. Francis. I actually went to the town of Assisi where St. Francis was, and it was a beautiful town. But the thing about Assisi is, and St. Francis is, that they took these vows of poverty. They didn't want to be involved in the lavish materialism of the church. And so these monasteries were beginning to take these vows of poverty where they would own nothing. Now, these are the 7 sacraments, and these are paintings that were done by Roger in 1448. If you look closely at these, you can see each one. And these were really, really important times in the life of the people who practiced the Catholic faith. So we can see in the left panel the sacrament of baptism, the sacrament of the confirmation of one's faith, and the sacrament of penance, which is a sacrament of confession. Of course, in the center, we see the Eucharist, which is where you take communion and you take the bread and the wine, which represent the body and the blood of Christ. In the right panel, you see the sacraments of ordination. That means when someone takes their priestly vows. You see the sacrament of marriage when 2 people are joined in marriage. And then you see the anointing of the sick, or something that is called the last rites, which is where one makes their final confession before they pass away and then hopefully go into perhaps purgatory or directly to heaven. Some popular reform movements and popular heresies also occur at this time. I've already talked a little bit about St. Dominic and St. Francis being concerned that the church was too materialistic, and they espoused the idea of having no personal possessions and becoming beggars. The Waldensians also criticized the Roman Catholic Church using the Bible as and certain biblical passages that say that, one must give up everything that they own to follow Christ. And so we can see remnants of the Waldensians in social justice movements that will come later, and then even Calvinists that we'll talk about later in the course. Now let's talk about Atlantic and Baltic colonization. Leif Erikson and the Vikings established colonies first in Iceland, then Greenland, and then Newfoundland, which is in Canada, what is now Canada. And we know that they, first of all, they called Greenland Greenland because they claimed that it was green, and they were trying to get people to go there and settle. There is a lot of evidence in both Greenland and Newfoundland that the Vikings established long-term colonies in those areas. But Scandinavia becomes Christian. Harold the Bluetooth is thought to be the first Christian king of Denmark / the Vikings in 960 CE. Whether it was forced or not is a little uncertain. But what you might find interesting to note is that the Bluetooth mark that we see on our phones right there on the left side of the picture was the runic sign for Harold the Bluetooth. His dad was actually buried in the town of Jelling in Denmark, in the Jutland part of Denmark, and then his dad is seated on a throne, and then the mound was built over that, and Harold Bluetooth is there as well. On this next slide, this is an actual rune stone. It's a picture that I took from Jelling in Denmark, and you can see the runic writing there, and Harold Bluetooth is on there somewhere. The town is just like an ordinary small town. You think like Red Wing if you've been there. It's kind of like that. So this is a map of the medieval expansion of Europe. You can see a number of smaller cities, smaller countries establishing their presence and their borders. They will not necessarily be the modern day borders that we have, but they will be somewhat close, especially like when you look at the UK and you look at the Scandinavian countries. All right, so we're going to wrap this up with the Crusades. Actually, we have one more thing after the Crusades, but I am fascinated by the Crusades. So here are the Byzantines. The Byzantines are like, we're being attacked by Muslims. And so they send out a call to Pope Urban in Rome, and they say, we want a small elite force of knights to come and help us to fight off Muslims from taking over Byzantium. But what does Pope Urban do? He goes, whoa, let's send all the knights that we can imagine, okay? So he makes this proclamation, and I believe there's a copy of it in your textbook, and he says, anyone who takes up arms and goes to liberate Jerusalem from Muslim control, and by the way, what the Byzantine Empire wasn't really asking for that, but that's what Pope Urban said, then you'll go straight to heaven. It's a ticket to heaven. Wow, how great is that? And by the way, you get to take your sword and you get to do what you want on the way. So in the First Crusade, they really caught the people in Jerusalem off guard. They were not organized. It's not that they didn't have a good military, it's that they were not organized. And so the Christian Crusaders did capture Jerusalem, and it was a pretty nasty battle. And hopefully, I can show you some videos of this in class. In the Second Crusade, about 1187, the Muslim leader Salah al-Din recaptures Jerusalem. And actually, when he recaptures Jerusalem, he's actually a lot nicer to the Christians that are there than the Christians were to the Muslims when they took it over in 1099. He once the fighting was done, he let them go. But the Crusades are not over yet. The Christians and the popes want to continue to have crusades. So if you just take a look at this map, we can see that there are 4 major crusades that take place. The only really successful one was the first one. After that, they weren't really successful at bringing Jerusalem back under Christian control. But they are a fascinating piece of history to study, and there are some really good movies about it. One of them is called The Kingdom of Heaven by Ridley Scott. I highly recommend it if the Crusades are something that you're interested in. It's about a 2.5-hour epic film. So what are the effects of the Crusades? Well, the Fourth Crusade destroyed Constantinople. Dumb, right? Why are crusaders, Christian crusaders, destroying a fellow Christian city? That was really not a great move on the part of the crusaders. But when we look at the social psychology of it, they just got caught up in warring. Anti-Semitism was rampant during the Crusades. There were many villages, Jewish villages, that were outright destroyed and burned during the Crusades. Jewish people were burned inside of their homes. It was a terrible episode in anti-Semitic history. We have lasting resentment between Christians and Muslims. In fact, to this day, there are some Muslim commentators that say, we don't talk about the Crusades as something that happened a long time ago. We talk about the Crusades as if they're still going on. But one of the positive effects of the Crusades was the exchange of ideas, technology, and trade goods. We have science, astronomy, techniques for building and construction. We have foods, we have spices, we have luxury goods like gems and coffee. Oh, that's a luxury. I love my coffee. Silk and rugs from Anatolia. And this is going to launch the age of exploration for Europeans as well. So the Crusades were tremendously important. They left a lasting impact on Europe and on Southwest Asia, also known as the Middle East. We're going to wrap up by talking just briefly one more time about the Reconquista in Spain. So starting in the 1060s, we have a gradual removal of Islam from the Iberian Peninsula. The Iberian Peninsula includes Portugal, here's Lisbon right here, and Spain. This is, so we start moving down across the Iberian Peninsula. Kind of the last holdout was Granada, which is here. And finally, that was captured in 1492. And thus we have Columbus sailing the ocean blue, which is no coincidence. So lots of things in this chapter. Make sure to do your key concepts. Keep in mind this conflict between the church and the state. who has authority. Keep in mind all of the themes of history. How does the economy change? How does culture change? How is the environment affected? And what are the social changes as well as, of course, political changes? Thanks for your attention and have a wonderful day.